Hello! Today I'm going to talk a bit about my timetable for my first year at university studying psychology. This is going back a while for me, so I might struggle to remember every detail. I do remember being really unsure what to expect before I got my timetable, so hopefully this will be useful in giving you an idea of what to expect if you're in that sort of position at the moment. I'll try to cover as much about the structure of the timetable, and feel free to ask any questions if you think I miss anything that you want to know. So for a bit of context and to make my colour coding make sense, these are the modules that I studied in first year. So most of these are compulsory. The Good Brain, Bad Brain was an option module that was offered by the medical school. Some people took applied psychology within the actual psychology department, but there was a lot of variations in the options that people chose, so languages, philosophy, history, computing, basically whatever you want. And the compulsory modules are pretty self-explanatory, especially if you do psychology, you'll know what these things are. So this is the timetable that I had for the first semester. The reason I've set it out like this, with the week numbers across the top, is because it's a good way to see what's the same each week and what changes. I actually made this for myself during Freshers Week because the timetable that I received had a lot of extra information on it for other tutor groups, other practical groups, all the things like that. So I extracted all the information that was for my groups onto here. I also used this to plan anything else that I had to attend, but I've taken off anything that's not related to the actual course for this video. So as you can see, we had lectures pretty consistently every week. For the most part it would be 1 hour per module, and it worked out quite nicely for me having one module per day for the lectures. That was a good structure to plan reading and an independent study for each one. So you can see I have research methods as my main lecture on Monday, cognitive on Tuesday, etc. for the rest of the week, so I can do a lot of the sort of follow-up work or the reading either before or after the relevant lecture. So aside from lectures, there's a few other bits in here. The first thing for week 1 was the study skills. These were quite useful in terms of having like a library induction, references, critical thinking. I think there was a bit on maths as well, so like the basic math skills that you need to be able to understand statistics later on. I don't think they were necessarily part of the research methods module, but they were taught by the research methods lecturer, which I think is why I coloured them the same colour. So research methods was probably the most intensive module, and it has quite a few different components. The tutorials that you have early on here were things like reading academic journal articles quite early on in the semester so that you can have that skill building up over the semester. I'm not sure how I ended up with my tutorials being on Wednesday afternoons a lot at the beginning, but the tutorial groups were organised separately for each group, and there was about 6 of us in the group. So also in research methods we had these computing classes which turned into statistics classes. The computing classes were a lot to do with formatting assignments, using Excel, using SPSS, using the online library systems. So that was a good study skills to begin with, introduction as well. And I think there was an assignment to do with that was a small percentage of the grade for the beginning of the semester. And then later on, as it becomes more of a statistics class, that was the beginning of exercises in SPSS. The SPSS coincided as well with the practical classes that started up later in the semester, which were to do with collecting data for projects. So the assessment for research methods was quite complex. We had the computer task, 2 practical class reports, and a test at the end of the semester, so in week 11. But to pass the module, regardless of your actual grade, you also had to complete Research Participation Scheme hours, which is the RPS. That was 10 hours per semester, and I managed to do about 4 hours worth of online studies to start off with, but there was a limit on how many online ones you could do, so I started to do lab studies later on in the semester and added those to the timetable whenever I booked them. If you have any version of RPS, I would actually really recommend doing the lab studies even if it's not enforced, because you do learn more about what sort of experiments people do. And cognitive psychology then in the red. In semester 1 was a 50-50 split between a lab book and a test. So the workshops in the first few weeks here were to do with the lab book, which was to do with visual search. So the first part where we had the workshop was mostly a lecture style session where we had sort of explained to us what the workshop was going to be about. And then the actual workshops are smaller groups, so you might have maybe 30 people. For biological psychology or psychobiology, there were also tutorials fairly early. We had another essay that was quite early in the semester, and we had individual tutorials for the feedback, with that being the first essay that we had to write. I remember that feedback session was actually on my birthday too. The workshops for psychobiology were the only workshops where it wasn't to do with an assessment. And they were basically sessions where the lecturer brought in some brain scans, I think they were CT scans, for us to look at and label the structures in the brain, which was really interesting as a session. And the exam for this module was after the Christmas break, but we did do a mock exam in the middle of the semester. The last core module, the Introduction to Learning, was, I suppose, a lot to do with the behaviourist approaches. The workshops were demonstrations, really. The one that sticks out in my memory was a classical conditioning demo with a popping balloon. I don't remember what that was supposed to be associated with, though. There was an assessment to do with that workshop as well, which was to write an abstract to do with one of the demonstrations. The exam for this one was all the way in the summer exam period, even though the module ended at the beginning of December. The option module for me had double lectures most of the weeks. These usually had about a 5-minute break in the middle, and the module had different lecturers each week. The assessment for this was an essay at the end of the semester with a choice of questions and a multiple choice exam again in week 11. So for these modules where they had the exam in week 11, you really had to be sort of revising the whole time as you went through the semester. If I move on now to semester 2, a lot of this is quite similar in terms of having the same lectures each week for the modules. The research methods, practicals and statistics classes became weekly as well, and the statistics classes on the Thursday were mostly paper-based statistics, which you could work through at home and then either get help in the session or just hand them in to the tutor. We had those marked every week, so you had to pick up your exercise book on the Monday. I have to say, having now been a TA, I do feel bad for the TAs that had to mark them every week. It must have been a really tight deadline, even though they were quite short exercises. They had quite a large pile of them to do. For the practical classes on the Tuesdays, they were mostly either computer classes or discussion or planning classes to collect data. There were 2 more practical reports with SPSS involved in those. I remember that one of them was to do with mental rotation, like spatial ability, but I can't remember what the other one was. And the exams this time were mostly in the summer. Cognitive psychology in the red then had a lab book and an essay and a summer exam, but the structure was quite similar, with the workshops for the lab book and some tutorials to go with the essay topic. I think the essay topic was childhood amnesia, but I can't remember what the lab book topic was. And then biological psychology, once we had the semester 1 exam in the first week, right in there with the lectures for the new modules, we had an online test where you could use books, but it was time limited. So you had to be quite organised with knowing where things were in your books. There's nothing else for that module until the summer exam. There was a new module which was Introduction to Mental Health in the purple, which also had a summer exam and a short essay. So this time there was only one exam in week 11, which was for my option module. So I had 5 exams in the summer. So the cognitive research methods, mental health, psychobiology from semester 2, and the introduction to learning from semester 1. And again, we had the research participation, another 10 hours across this semester. So I think that's pretty much all I can say at the moment about the structure of the timetable and the workload. As I said earlier, do let me know if you have any questions, or if you're going to be starting psychology this semester, maybe comment where you're going and see if you can find any course mates. And hopefully this has been helpful in giving anybody who's wondering about what their structure might be like an idea of what sort of thing to expect.